Hi, everybody. Hi, colleagues. Mike Oakes here. It's the Read Write Mike podcast, and I'm here with another episode on vocabulary. Frankly, I think I'm running out of things to say with regard to vocabulary, so I'm thinking of moving on pretty soon to other topics. But the topic I wanted to talk about today is vocabulary. I've got a few more things to say. I'm sure I could wrangle up and wrestle up a few more topics and ideas. And today, for our episode today, I want to talk about, well, what if you want to sort of create your own vocabulary curriculum? Partly I made the curriculum for teachers who maybe were unsure how to get started or what to do, or, don't have the time to do it, even if they did have the motivation to do it. Busy people. Managing time is one of the top 5 things that I hear teachers say year after year as with regard to, things that teachers are curious about and would like ideas and tips and help with. But if you do have time and you do have the interest and the motivation, you can create your own vocabulary curriculum too. The wonderful news is that people have told me that WordLove has been provides an awesome way to do that it provides sort of a groundwork to being able to draft and create your own curriculum, which is great. As I always say, I love that the curriculum not only gives you fish, but also teaches to fish as well. And it taught me to fish as well. Where I got the information from, which is, at least for WordLove specifically, learning individual words, much of the information is from Isabel Beck, McKeown and Kukin, from their book, Bringing Words to Life. Excellent book on teaching individual words. There's others who are great. Marzano's great. But primarily Isabel Beck and her colleagues. So here are my tips if you want to start creating your own vocabulary curriculum. Ready for it? All right. Step 1, decide on your vocabulary goals. What sort of are the categories or kinds of words that you want kids to learn? So some of your goals might be that you want them to learn really useful words that they can apply to other subjects and domains, like tier 2 words, which is what Beck, McKeown, and Kukin recommend. That's primarily what WordLove is it's mostly tier 2 words. Some people have a priority of academic vocabulary, which to me are kind of like a subset of tier 2 words, or tier 2.5 between 2 and 3. They're words that are travel across domains, but school domains mostly. Words that you generally see on things like, a state test, for example, has a lot of academic vocabulary, but those types of words, analyze, infer, stuff like that you work with in school, that you work with on standardized tests. You might have a vocabulary goal of kids knowing more content area vocabulary in science or social studies or math or what have you, health, whatever it is. And that also might be a part of your vocabulary goals. So that would be the first thing I want to think, like, well, what's the category? And if it's all of them, well, then you want to think big picture. Then, well, how many words do you want to use in a year? Because, this WordLove is all about individual word learning, but you can't overdo it. You don't want to teach too many individual words. Otherwise, you're going to kind of go against your own goals, which is to get kids to learn words. If you teach too many words, it's just a glut of words and they won't learn many of them well. So the point of individual words is you teach a very small number, but you teach them deeply, right? So they can transfer them and hopefully use those words to learn new words. So how many words to teach in a year? Well, Marzano recommends 120 words a year. And that feels like a lot to me. But I think it could be doable. If you do the math, it's like 3 words per week, or, 6 words every 2 weeks, which I think somewhere in there is a good range, actually, if I think about it. But you don't want to pick words willy-nilly. You'd kind of want a long-term plan of words. If you just use WordLove curriculum, you're going to do about 90 words a year, and that's going to be more tier 2 or academic vocabulary focused. So keeping that in mind, you may want to make sure that you add in more math or social studies or science words as well. So those are some considerations. Now, the next thing, once you've decided on your category of words, the next thing you want to think about is like, well, where are you going to actually get the words from, right? And you can always use, academic vocabulary. The people put out word lists, you can use those as a reference, but I would use those as a counter reference against the books that kids are actually reading and engaging, because you want to teach the words and the concepts that kids are actually going to be engaging with, right? That they'll actually see, because a lot of this is about transfer, not only into their talk and their writing, but also into their reading. As they read, they can encounter words that they know. So what that means is read the books that kids are reading, or the read alouds, or the mentor texts that kids that you read to kids, right? Um, any text that kids engage with, especially whole class texts like read aloud, mentor texts, what have you. Those are a good place to cull words from. And it's not just the words, it's the concepts. As I always say, you don't have to just teach a word that literally appears in a book. You can teach a concept that appears in the book, right? So I always use the example of envy. Like, say a character is jealous, but it doesn't even have the word jealous or envy in it. You can still teach the word envy because the concept appears. I tend to pick words that actually appear in the books, just because it's the the more lower hanging fruit. Sometimes it's a little bit level higher cognitively to think, you know, what are some concepts that appear in the book, and then what words manifest themselves. But you could do it. That'd be a fun game or activity to do with colleagues, so you have more brains around it. I think I only did it once in Word Love. I think it was in third grade research clubs, which will be coming out sometime this winter for third grade. And one of the words that appears in their books about like penguins was like predator, but the word prey didn't appear, or it was one or the other, right? It was like prey appeared, but not predator. And so I picked both words because one suggests the other, right? There's no predator without the prey, and vice versa. And so the concept definitely appears in it, even though the word didn't literally appear, which I was surprised at, actually. So those are my first two recommendations, are to decide on your vocabulary goals, and maybe even a scope if you're going to have several goals, like you want to pick words across a sort of spectrum of tiers, different kinds of vocabulary. And then to actually read the books that draw the words from the books that kids are reading, and to start there. So in a moment, I'll talk about our next steps when it comes to developing your own word love curriculum. So after you've decided on your goals, maybe a long-term plan of maybe how many words, if that's important to you, and you've got a chance, what books kids are reading, at least in terms of whole class books, like, read alouds, like even close reading books, mentor texts. In some cases, I draw from the state tests themselves, right? So any material that kids are actually reading is fair game, but preferably books, because that's what we want them to read all the time. So then as you read these books, what I do is I just read it through the lens of this. If it's like a tier 2 word or academic vocabulary word, I think to myself, as I'm reading, are kids saying this word? Like, am I hearing them say it in their speech, or am I seeing them use it in their writing? If the answer is no, it becomes a candidate. And what I do is I read, I'll read a text, and I'll have like a little stack of Post-its, surprise, surprise, next to me. And I will just literally write down the words. So oftentimes, I usually use the big lined ones. I don't know if I have an example, because there's a lot of words. You can get dozens and dozens of words for any one book sometimes, especially if it's a chapter or a longer book. And I just write down candidates. If it tends to appear more than once, I don't write it down again. It's like, because it's already appeared. But sometimes you forget when you're writing these long lists of words, you're like, oh, wow, explain appeared again. And you didn't even realize it. You look back at your list and you have explained 4 or 5 times. I only count it as once in the end. And then from there, sometimes what I'll do is what I do specifically is I counter reference it against other books that I've read for words, right? So if you're doing this across a year, you want to keep your list of words, your candidate words, so you can see like how frequently is this word kind of appearing across the year for students, because if it's popping up more than once, it suggests that it should be a bigger priority. And then I use my own judgment, and I say to myself, well, which of these words is going to be maybe more useful right? So maybe you come across the word carriage, like a horse-drawn carriage. I'm like, gosh, kids aren't saying that or writing that. It's a candidate, but how useful is carriage from day to day? Maybe it is if you're in a particular social studies history unit. I'll leave that up to you, but if I'm picking a tier 2 word, it's probably not going to make the top list. So you prioritize and you prioritize. And sometimes it's helpful to do this in a group as you're selecting these words, because sometimes people have different feelings. They're like, oh, my kids know these words or they don't. Again, I always push back against like my kids know these words, because we can always learn a word more deeply, right? If they know them, are they using them? And if they are using them, the next question is, are they using them figuratively or metaphorically? You can keep going. So it's, to me, the argument that kids, quote unquote, already know these words isn't quite good enough for this task, because the goal is not to just kind of know the words, not to just know it a little at a shallow level. It's the goal is to know it at a deep level. And so unless you can prove to me that somehow the kid can prove to me that they know the word deeply, I still can be a candidate. And also, I'm not going to let the tail wag the dog just because one or two or a small handful of kids know the words. I'm not going to dismiss the word, because then what you end up with a lot of time, I'm going off on the side now, so join me. A lot of times what you end up with is all these like sort of rare and unusual words, which are fine and they're great and they're lovely. But when you stack them all next to one another with kids, there are all these words that kids like kind of don't really know, and they're kind of unusual, and it's a lot for kids. And so it's like all these like, words that they know a lot less. It's nice to mix it up. It's nice in your vocabulary list to have some words that like, wow, no kid really knows very much. And then that other words that most kids feel kind of a little bit confident, like they kind of understand it when they hear it or when they read it. I think it's nice to have that mix. And so I do push back against this kids already know the words type thing. When you're picking the words, when you're whittling it down, also, sometimes I'll get the question asked, well, what if the word in the text already has context in it? Because kids can just figure out what it means through context. Again, that doesn't matter to me. If you're teaching context clues, great, but that's not what we're teaching. We're teaching deep knowledge of the word. Does the context suggest a deep knowledge of the word? If the answer is no, and it's almost always going to be no, it's still a candidate. So great if it has context, because it can like help kids figure out the word at a shallow level. But we're working with words so kids can learn it at a deep level. That's the goal, deep knowledge. So one thing that can be nice if you have a batch of words and you're sort of uncertain which words to select is just to make a quick Google survey and send it out to people on your team. Even like send it out to colleagues who aren't on your team. People love this kind of stuff. Fellow colleagues love like their input on teaching. Like, what do you think? We're teachers. Not only do we love to teach, we love to give our own tips and recommendations on what works. Like, share the knowledge and ask for input from others. It's really helpful. And I've had some teams who are developing their own vocabulary curriculum do this with one another. It's helpful because it helps the group sort of prioritize. I've done it, as you've seen, if you are subscribed to emails. I will often ask your input, which words should be best. And what I love about it is it's both confirming and it's sort of like it's a good revision tool, because it tells me that my hunch is pretty accurate when I pick certain words. It also tells me that if there are certain words that are off, like I'm just one person, so like I'm pretty good at picking vocabulary words, but sometimes it's the group can help me keep it real. And sometimes a word that I think is great, the general public is like, nah, that's not that great. Colleagues are like, it's not the best. There's others that are better. And that's helpful to know. So I've done that with fantasy for 5th grade. Thank you. That was so helpful, team. I've done it for the academic vocabulary. And it's, like I said, it's great because it's both sort of confirms that I'm on the right path with the words that I'm sort of suggesting, but it also helps nuance it and fine tune it. So ask your colleagues. And guess what? At the end of the day, if you have a colleague who disagrees with the final list, is it really, the end of the world if they swap out like one word that they prefer over the others that the group prefers? No, it's not, because you've generally a consensus of words, which is great if you're doing this with a team. So you select your words. And how many words? Again, if you're following Marzano's tips, it would be about 3 per week or 6 every 2 weeks. Back in McKeown, say like 5 per week or up to, either 10 every 2 weeks or 5 per week, I think is the range. or maybe if it's even 10 per week, something like that. It's like 5 to 10 per 1 to 2 weeks, I think is the range. And I just found that's too many, not only for kids, but for teachers to track. Because if, teachers want to assess and manage kids' progress, it's kind of hard to track the assessment if you're doing something like 10 words per week, right? That's a lot. So if you follow word love is 5 words per bend, 15 per unit, a unit going 4 to 6 weeks. And I found that that's certainly doable for students and especially for teachers if you want to monitor and see how kids are doing with the words as well. So you've got your words, your number of words that you want to introduce. Then your last step is to craft or revise or create kid-friendly definitions. And it's helpful if you're crafting them from your own mind to think bottom up. How are my children going to understand what I'm trying to convey? Some tools that I like to use Collins Dictionary. It's got a great learner's dictionary, very clear. Wordsmith is a great dictionary. We often partner with Wordsmith in terms of defining the words. Kids.wordsmith as well. So I want to put a shout out to kids.wordsmith. Great dictionary. Definitely lean on that for crafting your own definitions. You want to be careful of using standard dictionary definitions because they have the circuitous definition, like sarcasm is the state of being sarcastic or something like that, or the definitions that you go into a rabbit hole where you need to know the vocabulary to know the vocabulary you're looking up, and so on. So kids.wordsmith, big shout out to. I often use Collins Cobuild as well to craft my own kid-friendly definitions. And then you're off to the races. If you've been following Word Love, you've got the games ready to go, right? If you want other games that are going to be helpful, back in McKeown, in the appendix of Bringing Words to Life, you'll see a number of games. They even published a book that's like they expand and elaborate on their strategies. And Marzano always talks a lot of vocabulary games. The reason I like Beck and McKeown is they do it in a logical way where they march the words through word knowledge. So they start at very it's kind of like, I like the Bringing Words to Life because it starts with thinking about Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge. So they start at things like identify and then connect and transfer and then relate to one another. I really like that. It makes a lot of sense to me. Marzano's games are very clever. I sometimes wonder if there's less of a notion of like, is this on a pathway of understanding? I'm sure there is, but to me, it resonates more with Beck, McKeown, and Kuchen's work. And that's it. So those are the steps again. Decide on your vocabulary goals, right? And maybe think of a general scope and sequence of the number of words and what that means for how many per week. You want to hit the books that the kids are reading, that you're using, kind of, especially a whole class with books, mentor texts, read alouds, close readings. Select your words, thinking perhaps these are words that I'm not necessarily seeing or hearing in writing or in talk as candidates. Then whittle that down. If these are words that tend to appear a lot in the other books that you're also scouring, or if you determine that this is going to be a helpful word, then whittle it down. If you're working with a group, maybe send out a survey. It's helpful to sort of get some feedback on it from your colleagues. And then you can start crafting your definitions, and then Word Love can provide you another pathway as to where to go next. So, colleagues, I hope you got some good tips for if you choose to craft your own vocabulary curriculum, because the more kids know, the more they're able to learn. I will see you next time on the Read Write Mike podcast. Until then, be well. Take care.